Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the second AuxScout workshop for 2021. AuxScout is the Coast Guard Auxiliary Sea Scout Youth Development Program. Throughout the year, we'll be offering online workshops on a variety of subjects focused on boating safety, youth leadership development, and the Sea Scout program. Tonight's presenter is H. William Smith, known to his friends as Bill. Bill is the Auxiliary's AuxScout Marketing and Social Media Branch Chief and is a Coast Guard certified public affairs specialist. His extensive public affairs experience includes having served as the editor of the Auxiliary's Navigator and Navigator Express publications. Tonight's topic is how to write for youth programs. We've muted your microphones to make it easier for everybody to hear. If you have questions, please type them in the chat box. We'll be monitoring the chat and we'll be sure to leave time to answer your questions. If you have an urgent question though, please feel free to unmute your mic and ask. So let's welcome Bill Smith.
Good evening, everybody. I will tell you up front, I am at a bit of mourning in that I am a Green Bay Packers fan, and that's all I want to say about that. Writing for the auxiliary, it's interesting. On one hand, it shouldn't be that tough. We got a good story. We've got certainly all the support we need. And yet, through a number of years now, I find that there really aren't a lot of people who are really consistent contributors. I'll just put it that way. So we're going to talk a little bit tonight about writing not only for the auxiliary in general, but writing for the media in a press release, those types of things. I worked as a reporter for quite a while. I was a sports reporter for part of the time. And also I've been on the other side of things where I've been a public official. Writing it's increasingly, it seems, scary to people. And really, it's not. Bruce, you can go ahead and go to the next slide, if you would, please. It's something that we all do. We all have to do. It is changing as technology changes, and we become, in many ways, more abbreviated. The auxiliary is a place where that is not as true, and that's something we're going to talk about. I'm not going to read all the slides to you. I think that to me, that's death by PowerPoint. So I would like you to read. I will talk about them. And what we're trying to do here is we're trying to tell our story in a way that encourages people to become involved. It's that simple. In order to build this program, we're going to need to find folks who are interested and then engage them in what we are doing. I was not actively involved in this process. I was aware of it as editor of the Navigator Express. And then I decided to step back for a while, got bored, and then got asked to come back on without really a lot of knowledge about Sea Scouts. What I have found is that this is a wonderful story. And that's where I need to start. When you're writing, I don't care whether it's a press release or a book, you're going to have to engage the reader long enough to get your message across. Go ahead and give me the next slide, please, Bruce. And our goal is to take our skills and engage the people we find who are interested, both through social media and traditional media. And both are still active parts of our world. It's changing as technology more and more is centered in computers. I think when we come out of the pandemic, even more of this type of, well, just like what we're doing here will take place because it's a way to connect without the distances having to be crossed. As an organization this large, extending from Puerto Rico to Guam, think about that just a little bit in the numbers of different kinds of people that we're dealing with, numbers of different kinds of situations. The one thing that hopefully always remains true is that there is a good story And that story needs to be told. Next slide, please. Why do we want to write for the print media? I hear it all the time. We don't, nobody reads newspapers anymore. And there is some evidence to say that that's becoming true to an extent. Newspapers in local areas, your weekly newspaper in particular, if you're in a small area like I am, or your dailies, you know, in the large urban areas, there's still a wealth of information. What is becoming true is space is getting very hard to get for free. And that's where the press release comes in, but we'll talk about how those need to be used in this changing media world today. But if you look at the list here, there are all kinds of things that are still involved in print. Each one of those is going to need some form of writing. And that writing is going to have to convey specific messages and in specific sizes often. Many of these different elements have finite size. Knowing how to write for that is a technique that is continually has to be honed. Next slide, please, if you could, Bruce. And the basics are, this is an 8-second world we live in. On television, you'll see what's known as an 8-second soundbite. People are used to seeing bits of information that are delivered quickly and not overly long. That's true of an awful lot of even writing. But the fact of the matter is, the bottom line is you got to get people's attention early on. Stories have to be well written and, above all, in our environment, grammatically correct and factually accurate. Those are things that are somewhat immutable. Also, photography is going to be an element of almost anything you write. So think about that as you are constructing your story, and be thinking about if you are at an event. We'll talk about just if you're in an event. Your phone is your best tool. You can take 3 or 4 pictures. You don't need a ton of shots, but you need 3 or 4 pictures that convey what is going on in ways that they can be used by us in situations where the clearances are properly done as far as youth, and they also need to be able to convey a message quickly and very succinctly. This is something that is going to be changing as we get into more and more technologically based things. It's going to need even more video and photographic input. Next slide, please. And I'm looking at time to try. Last time I went long, which is something I'm fairly well known for. Writing for AuxScout. There are a number of different forms. An article can be something anywhere from 3 or 4 paragraphs to a couple, 3 pages long, depending on what it is. It depends on the form you're writing for too. If you're writing for, say, the Navigator, then you're writing possibly a longer article. If you're writing for the Navigator Express, you're writing something shorter. If you're writing for what's called a brief in your newspaper, stating when you are going to be having an event at a marina or with a group of scouts, that's going to be even shorter. There are some pitfalls that I've consistently seen in editing, and one of which is the use of the first person, which means that the word I is a word you want to use less than any other word in writing for these types of publications. Because frankly, the story isn't about you. The story isn't about me. The story is about the event. The story is about the people involved. The people, if you are a reader, you're looking through a window into who these people were, what they did, and why they did it. There are tools available that are simple. The term we is always a good one. They. My is as close to me as I try and get. You want to involve as many people, and as if you were an observer looking at the event or the story from somewhat outside of it. So try not to involve yourself. That will often be edited differently. And what you really want to do is you want to write clean enough so that the editing just improves the story and doesn't limit what you were trying to say. One of the things that will get in the way of that is if you put yourself forward in the story. Length is something that you're going to have to continually judge how long a piece should be. And the other thing is inappropriate stories or information. They just aren't going to be used. So think about what one of the good things to do is just before you write anything, think about it. And who is your audience? How are you going to tell the story? In what form, in other words? And what are the elements of that story that are going to make it interesting to somebody who may not know anything about the subject? Use those kinds of keys. And the other thing is don't be afraid to ask for help, and don't be afraid to use an editor. I try and we have at, and I'm not going to shift all of this to him, but Bruce Johnson's one of the best editors I've ever worked with. And I've been very fortunate. I've worked with some good ones. He's professional. That's the standard. So find a good editor and don't be afraid to take their advice. Go ahead and give me the next slide, please. Writing for AuxScout and writing, if you ever read a lot of military publications, and for that matter, technical publications, it's a different style of writing than, say, short story or a feature article. There are a lot of elements in writing for AuxScout that are going to be feel a little constrictive at first. Like I say here, there is no LOL. Acronyms in general, you're going to find are encouraged to, if you do use an acronym, and sometimes we have to, spell out what the acronym is about first, and then put the acronym in parentheses. This is in first reference. In other words, the first time you do it. Later on, as you establish what the acronym is by writing it out, then you can start to use the acronym individually. Every once in a while, it's not a bad idea to refer back to that acronym in its entirety so that people will be reminded of what the acronym stands for. We all know there are tons of acronyms in both scouting and in the auxiliary. So this is something to be conscious about, because an editor, especially if you get it to the point of publication, is going to want to make sure that those are correct. And that brings me to my favorite book when it comes to writing. And that is this book here. I'm going to try and hold it up so you can see it. The Associated Press style book is the go-to book for not only the auxiliary in public affairs. I'm not sure what the standards are with the scouting programs, but also the Coast Guard. It is also the standard used by journalists throughout this country and others. It has many, many answers that can solve a problem. One big one is military titles. If you see this piece of paper, that piece of paper is literally right at the section on military titles, because it, in order to really look professional, you want to get those in particular correct. As you get further into this, also in scouting titles, many of which, I'll be honest with you, I have to learn. Then I want to learn the title. Lots of times I'll take notes, and then I'll use the acronym after I'm perfectly comfortable with what the title is. But the Associated Press style book is the go-to book for everything we do. Go ahead and go to the next slide, if you would, please, Bruce. Article construction. And this is just like everything that has rules. Occasionally the rules get broken, but really especially when you're starting, kind of staying with the rules will help you get started and help you gain confidence as a writer. Articles have several elements. The title, and believe it or not, the title is sort of like the headline in a newspaper. You want the title to give the reader some inkling of what the article is going to be about. My suggestion with titles is don't get overly cute. right up front, especially in this style of writing. And you're going to see on this slide, the lead, L-E-D-E, that is a strange spelling for lead, L-E-A-D, but it is the journalistic term for that first set of paragraphs, usually 1 or 2 paragraphs, that contain the 5 W's and the H, and or state the thesis of what you're doing. And it depends on what kind of article as to whether you're doing an open or a thesis. The more technical and explanatory, somewhat academic type articles present a thesis often. The next thing after you've established that, and don't be afraid to look at your lead more than once as you kind of self-edit and try and make it as tight as possible. But you do want to, in the early part of the article, get the 5 W's and an H, and we'll talk more about that in a second, into that first section of the article. The next thing is going to be the body. That's where you're going to tell the story. And that story does not have to be long. It can be if it needs that, but it is where you're going to do the body of your writing. Section headings are something that are handy to divide off. I use them a lot, which are kind of subtitles as you go through an article. And that will, if you use a heading and you make the paragraphs under that heading apply to that heading, you'll find that it organizes your article for you. And it also helps the reader as they go through the article. And then you want to pay whatever the story you're telling off in a closing. And you want to think about how you want to close. What do you want to leave the reader with? Often there are times you want to recapitulate the thesis or the lead in some way. You also want to make sure that any pertinent information is included in the closing, and you want to be able to take the reader on their journey to that ending and leave them in a place where they remember what you said. It's that simple. So think about it as you are constructing your article in those terms. And it's like biting off an elephant. One chunk at a time really works well. That doesn't mean you can't jot ideas. One of the tricks I do often, and I write in Word, and that is if I have something I might want to use later, I just write it below. And I'll hit the space bar or the return several times, get it down out of where I'm actively writing, but something that I want to maybe look at later for inclusion. And don't be afraid to do that. Use your first draft as exactly that, a draft. And at the end, of course, if you are dealing in technical terms or you are referring to other sources, make sure you cite them. Make sure that the reader knows that this is not your idea, that this is something you gained from somewhere else. It doesn't hurt with some of it to also place quotes around it and then either footnote it or cite it right afterwards. One of, a favorite is, according to the Washington Post on Tuesday, or the Washington Post, this was said. And then you can write it out. But then the reader knows that this came from another source beside yourself. Plagiarism is something that will really not be tolerated in any sense. We use other people's stuff all the time. We just want to make sure that they are credited for it. The other thing is, this is also true of photography as often as possible. If not, something I've had to use as a caveat is just, this is a Coast Guard auxiliary photograph. If you know the name, and we can talk a little bit about photography in other training, if I have a little bit of time, I'll talk about writing a cut line or those types of things for a photograph. But let's move ahead. Go ahead and give me the next slide, please, Bruce. Inverted pyramid. It's an archaic term in today's world of computers, but it actually still has use. Back in the old days, in Linotype, which is actually when I first worked for a newspaper when I was a kid, I was in the circulation department, they were still using Linotype. They're still using lead. And every type of media you're going to work with, but in particular newspapers, magazines have a finite amount of space. Well, if you write long, back in the old days, the typesetter would have to cut off part of your article and just to make it fit, and that it was just literally lopped off. So folks got used to writing and getting the most important information that they wanted to express in the top of the article, hence the inverted pyramid. As it goes down to the point, that's the least germane, possibly information. You want, again, the who, what, why, where, when, and how up high. You want your story to have been led into the best information in the first numbers of paragraphs, and then you can put in supporting information and do your close. What you want to make sure happens is that your close doesn't get cut off, because often that has pertinent information. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide, please. And after the basic facts have been presented, the writer's job is to get the reader to continue reading. If you look at a newspaper or a magazine, that first page is critical. In a newspaper, often the article will be continued to deeper into the paper. And what it's called is you want your article to make the jump. In other words, you want the person to turn the page, to go to that next page. A lot of people will read a headline, and if it doesn't grab them in that first few pages, or first few paragraphs rather, they're going to go on to something else, especially in today's world where we are bombarded with so much media. So get a good grip on your story up front, and then take your reader as deep into the article and hopefully all the way to the end by continually bringing them along in the story, whether it's by giving more information or something that just piques their interest. But whatever it is, you want that reader to get to the end of your article and feel satisfied that they gained something. Go ahead and give the next slide, please, Bruce. And I'm just gonna, you can take a look at this. Space is actually, especially in your local newspaper, on your local television station, is getting tighter and tighter. I've watched the paper that I used to work for go from 30 pages, it was a bi-weekly, to down now to 8. Which means that the ability to get your information in it is going to be tougher and tougher. One of the things that is kind of an aside, but as you write, know who your gatekeepers are. Get to know them and take care of them. If it's a reporter at a newspaper or an editor, if it's a reporter at a local television station, lots of times their contacts are people like you. And if there's a good story, get a hold of them and say, hey, listen, I got a good story for you. And, pitch it to them. Tell them what it is. Tell them what it's about. If it's an event, tell them about the event and try and gain their interest. And then you're going to either take a press release or an article that they can actually use either as the article itself or draw from, and take it to them and hand it to them. When we were in our newspaper, and this was just a small, basically country 3-paper group, we could get 20 or 30, especially on like a Friday, we get 20 or 30 press releases. You're not going to get them all in the paper. So you look through and you'll scan them, and these people do not have a ton of time. And they say, oh, wait a minute, this one looks interesting. That's the story. You want to be that story. So cultivate your relationships. Be honest with your relationships as far as your reporters. Try not to ever hang them out to dry, because you will never get anything back in their paper if you do. They do remember and have long memories. This is true of television as well, radio. These social media is a totally different story, and that's really a personal interaction, and it really comes down to, will they read what you wrote? And what will they think about it when they do? Next slide, please. Writing a lead. In journalism school, they try and teach you one way we were taught in a newspaper traditional setting was 32 words or less. In other words, a paragraph or even less. In journalism, these are the two definitions. And if you notice, I put this in here specifically. I put the citation at the end of the one in the kind of burgundy color, and I put the citation at the beginning of the second definition, because those are two techniques you can use. If you notice, I put quotes around in the second one, according to Oxford Language definition is, and then quoted it directly, and do not change, if you put quotes around it, do not change a word in it. You do not want to get that phone call, believe me. This is, and according to Merriam-Webster, I looked these up because I'm always curious as to what the definition really is of a lead. And this is it. It's a term that a lot of folks won't know, but this is the traditional term for writing that first paragraph of about anything you will do. Go ahead and give me the next slide, please. And these are the 5 W's and an H. You will, time and time again, want to remember these 6 things. Who is doing it? What are they doing? Why are they doing it? Where are they doing it? When they're doing it? And how are they going to do it? If you wrote a paragraph for each of those things in the body of an article, you'd about have your article written. What you want to be able to do is, in that first paragraph, give enough of this information. So first of all, if somebody only reads that, they'll at least know, these elements, if they aren't going to go any further. And we all scan, think of how many emails we get in a day. If you use these in emails, you'll get more of your information across. I don't care if it's a post on Facebook or an article for your local newspaper or something for the Navigator. You're going to want, at least at some point early on in your article, preferably near the top, to answer all of these questions, and then the how, which is how you're going to tell them how. Next slide, please. If you ever go to any kind of a writing class, this gets drilled, and if you notice, I've repeated this a number of times. That lead paragraph will determine an awful lot. It also makes your job a lot easier later on in your article. If you get those things out of the way, then you can deal with them kind of in detail. And some of which you will not even, once you've referred to these, once you tell them who. Now, one thing that is true in writing for these types of publications, first reference is an important thing to remember. In other words, the first reference of me in an article would be H. William Smith or Bill Smith, branch chief, yada, yada, yada. After which, in order to save space, you can, in some publications, most actually, just say Smith said or Smith does. Now, the New York Times does the old traditional Mr. Smith, Mrs. Smith. I would just use last names. Occasionally, in a longer article, you want to make sure you refer back to that first name or title and name, just so people don't forget, especially if there's somebody else with the same name. And with Smith, believe me, I've been there and seen that. So get this out of the way, keep it in the back of your head, and then write to it. Keep your theme tight. One trick that I learned a long time ago, and it was actually a trick that I learned in theater as far as reading plays, create a theme for yourself and make it be 5 words or less, unless you are using and the and those types of words. but keep a tight theme. What is the theme for this presentation? How to write for the media for AuxScout. Everything we try and do here will apply to that theme. It can become real handy to keep you from wandering. And as somebody who writes long, I have been known to wander, and I've had more than one editor saying, come on back, Bill, keep it on message. Next slide, please. This is an example of an article that I wrote, and this is also going to point up, I put this in here because this points up a lot of the problems that when we write for the military, the auxiliary, scouting in general, I'm beginning to learn, is the titles are everywhere and nothing is short. I wanted to reinforce kind of the theme of the two people who these were dear people. We honored them last spring with our flotilla, and they were kind of honorary flotilla members. The story, I've written about this family for years. Gene was in his 90s when he finally passed. But if you notice, in writing about them, I tried to set a tone. This is kind of a feature and an honorarium. But if you notice, you get into, first of all, when you refer to the United States Coast Guard, first time, that's first reference, United States Coast Guard. Second of all, you get right into titles. Chief Warrant 04, retired Eugene Radin. And CPO, which Chief Petty Officer, retired Peggy Radin. Then you have the family members, and you go down to the second paragraph and you get into a whole new set of titles that you have to deal with. U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliaries, District 8, Eastern Region, Division 4, change of watch. Chew on that one for a while, but that's what you have to do. Afterwards, you can do District 8, Eastern Region, or you can do District 8 in a descending order of relevance, or that's not specificity. But you've got to get that first one. So, and I don't know how many of you, when you read something, you'll go back and say, no, wait, what was that? Well, this, you should at least have in here where they can go to say where, that's the where and the when and the how. You go further in this, and I don't even get to where the event is held in this article. This article is quite a bit longer than this. But theirs is the where and the location, and then the members of the gold side who were there. And then you get into Commander, 2nd Sector Ohio Valley, Captain Amy Beach. Then, Chief Warrant 03, John Tracy, Lieutenant JG, and this one will trip you up. That's why the Associated Press style book is so important. I've had to look and remember how JG is delineated, and that's it. And then Master Chief Petty Officer Frank Tattoo. Anyway, these examples are some of the pitfalls we run into in this kind of writing. I find a lot of times when I get articles, those things are not accurately done, and I end up having to make a phone call. And one thing that everybody's time is limited. You don't want your editor having to call you up 3 or 4 times because they're wanting clarification on what it is that a title or a name. The other thing is, nobody likes to have their name spelled wrong. And that is something that take the time, don't guess. If you have to guess, don't put the name in until you get it right. And you can remind yourself in notes or somewhere else to find out in a second draft, because odds are your first draft is not going to be your final product. Next slide, please. This is a recent article that I wrote, and actually I put on our Facebook page and then tried to share it around to different. I got thinking to myself, again, I'm new to Sea Scout. I also typically don't as much communicate with younger people as I used to. So I was curious to get the impressions of a Sea Scout. What language are they speaking? Believe it or not, English can be spoken in a lot of different languages. The way a 17-year-old individual reads and perceives language is often much different than somebody who is 69 years old like me. The other thing is, here in the Appalachian Mountains, we talk a certain way. We think a certain way, which is quite different than another part of my life, which is out in Montana, which people have different frames of references. And this is true even of the sailing communities. I participate in 2 sailing communities, one of which is in Northeast Tennessee, and the other is in Flathead Lake, Montana. Even some of the terms are slightly different. But if you look at this, here's where I talk about subheadings. I do my open. It's a fairly short paragraph. I do a little bit of a setup in that got me thinking, which takes me forward. And what it got me thinking about is, who's our audience? The next paragraph is kind of trying to address that. The next one is, that I have a lot to learn, which I do. I can learn from every one of you in particular about sea scouting, but about everything about this. The wonderful thing about being a curious writer is you get to learn a lot of stuff. And that is one of the reasons that we write, is you take in information and you want to express it and share it. So I just a subhead. And then if you notice down at the bottom of this, there is kind of a setup. Here are the questions that I asked and her answers. There are many more questions I could have asked, but the Scout's time was precious, which was absolutely true. I also did not use the Scout's name. And I also, before I did anything, went to their skipper, went to Bruce, and arranged for this individual to actually exchange. We exchanged emails. We've never personally met, and we haven't talked necessarily even on the phone. So I came up with 5 questions, which is not a bad idea for any interview you do. Write out your questions first. And rarely do you do an interview with more than 10 questions. In this instance, it was 5, and this was the first one that I asked. What I found were things that I suspected, but I wanted confirmation of someone who was more than willing to think about it and answer me from the perspective of a person under the age of 18. We can be ships passing in the night if we're not careful. We can speak languages that do nothing but drive away some of our readership, and we don't want to do that. So don't be afraid, skippers and auxiliarists. Talk to your scouts. Find out what they listen to. Find out what they read. Increasingly, when I talk, and with me, it's my grandchildren, about what they read, I find, and even some of my own children who are in their 30s, they don't read as much as I do. They don't read in the same way. Saying, well, you should read more, it ain't going to work. You're going to have to say, okay, what do you read? How do you read it? And how can I communicate with you in a form that you will read? Go ahead and give me the next slide, please. An awful lot of the time, you're not going to be writing an articles. It's like, we can hopefully, the article that I just showed you, it looks like now might actually, I've pitched it to the Navigator and the editor of the Navigator. The other thing is knowing when to pitch something. Right now, the Navigator is getting put together. They need articles. And it's always like pulling teeth. Believe me, I know. Which means that if you've got something good, there are times you can get it in it. One way to find out if it's good is, has it already been tried on something else, in a local newsletter, on your own website, somewhere where you've gotten some sense that what you've written really has validity. Then don't be afraid, and I will be happy to help with this. Don't be afraid to pitch it. By pitch it, I mean try and convince me to try and convince them that this is a good article that they might want to print. If you heard all of those iterations, that's several gatekeepers that most articles have to get through before getting published. And this is true unless you are Michael Tugayas or somebody who, when somebody sees their name, they're immediately going to print them. Most of us are not well-known writers, and you're going to have to sell your story. And the way you're going to sell it is that it's tight, it's well written, and it's interesting. That story can then very quickly become a press release where you start telling people. And by press release is a bit of a misnomer because, again, most of our media anymore is not newspaper. But for the term, it is the typical term. If you were to look, say, on Word for a release to the press, when you Google it or when you search it, press release brings you up 2 or 3 different examples. And I'm going to go just through each of these 4 categories, and they're each, a press release is transmission of pertinent information. It's the bottom line stuff. There's not going to be a lot of story. You are getting the media interested in what the story might be. It also should be in a form that media recognizes. In other words, we used to get, back in the old days, we'd get them on fax machines. And there'd be a pile of them on the floor the next morning. And they'd be coming in from the government. They'd be coming in from local government. They'd be coming in from local nonprofit organizations, all wanting their information transmitted. Get people used to seeing yours in a standard form, and they will then know, wait a minute, there's something I might want to run on the AuxScout program, and I just saw one of those. Let me pull that so I can look at it and see if it's something we might want to run. And that's an editor thinking. Don't change it each time. Once you get your press release form together, keep it that way. I will show you, we'll go on and I'll show you a couple of different elements. The 2 slightly different press releases that I have below or in the next slides are things I'll go through and try and show you in that. Like I said, it should stay static and recognizable. And the concept of a press release is going to be different for different forms of media. You can start with what's called an advance, which is, say you have a Marina Day coming up and you want to let the public know about it. You may want to do a couple of different advances. One, several weeks out, say, just making people aware of it. Then one in the week of the event or a couple of weeks before. And that is something that then points them to it. And then when it changes into a release about the event itself after it's happened, then it is no longer an advance. Go ahead and let's go to the next slide, please, Bruce. Here is what I put this together. I tried to copy it and then turn it into a PDF, but we'll go down through it and I'll let you look at it. I like to put a graphic at the top. Again, that graphic an editor tells whoever may be looking at it where and who this is, the contact information, which is what they're going to want right away, email address, phone number, Coast Guard Auxiliary, and this is one from years ago. Then you want the date. You want to make sure that so that they can contextualize when they got it. Then you do a headline, which sometimes will find its way into the headline in the publication, sometimes not. If this is in an area that's larger than your local town, you want to do kind of the dateline. Where did this take place? Hampton, Tennessee. And then you go on from there and you detail out at about 2/3 of the way through. This has been cut for length so I could get it on one page. This caveat at the end, U.S. Coast Guard was founded in 1939. That italicized information is something that, if you have the room, should go at the bottom, which again provides a little bit of background if a reporter wants to add that type of information into the article themselves. If you look down below that, there's a little tiny photograph, which is the photograph that I had submitted to the local papers. Above it is what's called a cut line. And that would go with, that gives the editor an idea of what to put underneath the picture. We can talk about cut lines in detail, but I think probably those are the kinds of things that if you are interested or you've got a question, get a hold of me. An old journalistic term, or I'll go one step down, and there's the photo credit. U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary Photo by H. William Smith. And then the 3 number signs, that means that this release is done. And that's just an old journal. It's called, this is slugging the press release. Then an editor, because sometimes these things will come in and there'll be one right after another. That creates a divider between this press release and anything else you might send. Go ahead and give me the next slide, please. This is one that you can literally just pull right off of Word. This is a Word press release. And this is one, actually, we had Gary Jobson, and I put this press release to go out for local media. And it worked. We had pretty decent coverage. But it has a title block up in the top right, which is your graphic. You put your name in there, what it is. If you're just doing a black and white, and this is a very, very basic press release. Again, it has Dateline. It has a headline, a subhead, some body, which is got the 5 W's and the H, a paragraph on who Gary Jobson is, and tickets are available from Watauga Lake Sailing Club and Tri-Cities Boating Club members online, and there's phone numbers. Those are the basic elements in this. And you want those elements in anything. And this really doesn't matter if it's something you're going to put on your Facebook page or something that you're going to send to a local newspaper or the television station. Don't reinvent wheels. Start with a basic press release, and then you can modify it or tweak it if you want to put it online. If you want, and again, you can turn them into PDFs if it's something where it wants a JPEG or a photographic type document rather than copy. You can insert that. This one, I can't remember. I think this is just actually a Word document that then I just copy and pasted and turned into a JPEG, or actually I think I did turn it into a PDF and drug the PDF into the PowerPoint. By the way, PowerPoints also can be put together in the manner that we're talking about throughout this whole presentation. These techniques and these processes, elements of them can be used in almost every form of writing. Go ahead and give us the next slide, please. And again, an initial tip, if you're doing an advance, make sure that at the end of the article, it restates the event's name, where it's happening, all the 5 W's and the H, and then contact information, ticket prices if there's going to be a charge, so that a reader will have the information they need to attend that article or attend that event in that article or that advance, because that may be what they refer to. I do it all the time. There's something I want to go see or do, I go back to an advance that I may have on my machine. Next slide, please. Okay. Question and answers. And this is pretty much where I'd like to go for the last 10 minutes. And I'm going to ask these questions and then we'll open it up to folks. I'm going to say this. And I just used, and metaphors are not bad things. Things that link things in people's minds. So I decided to go, who are we writing for? Why are we writing for them? In other words, knowing why you're writing for your audience is really something that you want to think about before you do it, because you don't want to waste their time. Then what are we writing? What is the content? If it's an interview, did you do a series of questions and get answers? Is it dates and times for a press release? Make sure you have them, and make sure that you have vetted them before you put them on something that can go out to the public. This last one is sometimes important to know. Why are we writing? Are we writing just to make ourselves feel good, or are we writing because we want to communicate something we feel strongly about? Are we communicating just something that might hopefully increase attendance at an event? Know why you're writing whatever you are writing. And there will be times you will say to yourself, well, listen, this really doesn't need this much attention. So you prioritize. Does it just need what's called a brief, which is a title and a couple of paragraphs, which again always have the 5 W's and the H. And then this is a really important one. Excuse me. When is it needed? In almost any kind of journalism or media, there is a deadline. Because if you send it into the local paper a day before the event, don't expect it to get much play. If you send it a month before the event, don't expect it to get much play. And if you send it after the event, they're just going to look at you like you didn't know what you were doing. So find out what the deadline for whatever media, and in social media, it's right now or 5 minutes from now. Also, though, just remember, in social media, once it's out there, you no longer have as much control over where it goes or how the discussion develops. Be ready for that. And then finally, how can we best accomplish the mission? Whatever the mission is, we want to define that for ourselves. And with some training and some knowledge, we can put together some form of writing that best suits what we're trying to get done. And with that, I'm going to throw it open to questions and discussion, and don't be afraid to ask them. The other thing is, I serve as a resource. I am a very small shop in that I am alone in that. But I can usually within a day or two get back to you and help if there's a way I can help. Thanks, Bruce. Here are a number of things. Get a hold of the Auxiliary Public Affairs Guide. It's downloadable. AuxB Wiki is a tremendous resource. In all the things I have done for the Auxiliary over the 8 or 9 years I've been writing for them, this is the best organized resource I have found. Then, of course, there's the AP Style Book. I have 3 or 4 of them, wherever some of them are, and I end up buying a new one because I lose them. Get one. You can get them off of Amazon. This one comes from Amazon. Or go down to your local newspaper, talk to your reporter, ask them where they got theirs. Establish that relationship. The Coast Guard Style Book is strictly Coast Guard style, the different terms that are unique to the Coast Guard. And then when words collide, I'm trying to see where, I guess I've got it in my folder, Google it. It is a handy little guide that answers tons of different questions that we all run into as far as word usage. English has words that there are two spellings and 2 different meanings, but if you read them, they say the same word. It helps to find those types of things. Punctuation, which is, again, the style book, your punctuation needs to be as correct as possible. Typically, the Oxford comma is not used in journalism, but in anything we do, the Oxford comma will appear because so many of us were taught that. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you folks. And Bruce and Holly, if you would moderate this.
Sure. For those of you who may not have opened it up yet, the chat box is open, and some people have very helpfully put in some information. There's the address for the YouTube channel, and somebody plugged in a URL for When Words Collide. A question came up, can I see the press release again? What I'd like to tell you is that on AuxScout Wiki, as of tomorrow, this PowerPoint presentation will be available and you can download it. And probably tomorrow we'll also be posting the recording of this on the YouTube channel, and will also be linked to from AuxScout Wiki. So as for the press release, I would just urge that you download the PowerPoint presentation, and you'll be able to get all of these references and examples and be able to look at them very carefully. So are there other questions? You can either post them in chat, or you can unmute your mic. Let's see, here's a question. I'm relatively new to the auxiliary. I don't know yet that we have a point of contact for public affairs that interfaces with local media. Would I be okay to just reach out to local media to establish those local relationships? That's definitely a Bill Smith question.
First, I'd go through either your flotilla commander or your skipper if you were in Sea Scouts. Be aware of, once you do that, somebody may want you to be the guy or the gal. And it's funny, that is a position that doesn't get filled all the time, and it's very frustrating to me that it is. But the other thing is, and now get your pens out. This is my email address, and that is Bill, BILL, period, Smith, SMITH, at USCG. Well, there it is, bill.smith at cgauxnet.us. Don't be afraid to get a hold of me. Be happy to help.
We did this presentation this evening, both to teach people how to do this stuff, but also to encourage you to tell the story. We have a tremendous thing that we're doing here. The Coast Guard Auxiliary and the Sea Scouts are working together, and we want to make sure that people know about it. And Bill is here to help you develop the skills to make this happen and to make the connections. Are there any other questions before we sign off?
Give me about a sentence or worth of time towards the end, Bruce.
Well, we're at the 59-minute mark.
That's plenty of time.
So maybe you ought to go ahead and have your closing remarks.
If a tree falls in the forest, nobody hears it. Does it make a sound? If we don't tell our own story, somebody else will tell it for us and get it wrong. The bottom line is, this is a great story. And the fact of the matter is, people, once they get turned on to it, a lot of folks get interested quick. I did when I was first brought on board. So that's our goal. We want to bring people on board, and then we want to spread the word. Thank you all for your attention. And like I said, use me as a resource. Be happy to help you when I can.